Good morning. I was just laying in bed doing my devotions after my family left for school and work this morning. And I do, every year I do the same read through the Bible in a year app. And today I stumbled upon Hebrews 11. It was the end of my daily reading, and Hebrews 11 is something that just stops me in my tracks every time I read it. And by the time I got through, I was only supposed to read like the first 12 verses of Hebrews 11 today. But by the time I got through those verses, and on the bottom it says click to read the full chapter if you wanted to finish reading the full chapter, although the full chapter would have been finished tomorrow and the day after. And I was so taken back by the words in the first 12 verses that I just had to click read the full chapter. And by the time I was done with it, I really felt so strongly that someone needs to hear this today. So here goes. The heading of the chapter is called Great Examples of Faith. And it starts off with basically a definition of faith. So it says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is evidence of things we cannot see. And I'm going to be skipping through. Verse 3, by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. Next verse. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Next verse. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him, for before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. Moving on. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. But by faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and to go to a land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and she was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. Keep going. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who received God's promise, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac. Keep going. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future to his sons Jacob and Esau. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed and worshipped as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones when they left. It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle blood at the doorposts. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days and the walls came crashing down. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had welcomed the spies. And then it says this in verse 32, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith, the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, they quenched the fires of flame, escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back from death. And it goes on, and it goes on. And I become overwhelmed with emotion when I see all these statements. It was by faith that this happened. It was by faith that this happened. And a lot of times it was by faith that they had to do something really difficult and trust the Lord with the outcome. You know, I think of Noah building the ark. By faith, he built this ark trusting that the rain was coming, because he didn't build the ark when it was raining. He built the ark well before the rain began. But he had faith knowing that what the Lord had told him, although it sounded wackadoo to everyone around him, that the Lord would follow through on his promise. It's like Abraham, when he offered his son Isaac. Abraham and Sarah were old in age, and it didn't make any sense why they would have a kid. But God had made a promise. And so then here comes Isaac. And then God says, no, go sacrifice him. Go kill him. Offer him as a sacrifice. And Abraham didn't flinch. He didn't flinch. He said, whatever it is, Lord, you're asking of me, because he had faith that the promise that was given to him before the son was even born was going to follow through. And so he did. He takes him up and he puts him on this altar, and right as he's ready, what comes but a ram? By faith. He was willing to follow through, but by faith he knew that going through with even all the way up to the last bit, and he says, stop, and he hears the ram. By faith, the Israelites walk on dry land as they're being followed by the Egyptians, and they're fleeing to their freedom. It just makes me wonder, who needs to say today in faith? Faith is the reality for what we hope for, but is evidence of things we cannot see. What is it that you can't see today? It doesn't make sense today, but by faith. And then you insert your name. By faith, Leah, and I'll use my story. By faith, Leah left her teaching job to step into full-time ministry, not even knowing what that would look like in the end. Walking away from a full income, a steady salary, doing something that she loved, me, I'm talking third person, but me, because I knew that God had called. I knew that he called, and he said, all right, it's time. By faith, will you step out? By faith, will you step out? Like Abraham, when God called him to leave. And this was a story that I read in my process of when I was praying over, Lord, did I hear that right? You want me to do what? You want me to quit teaching and do, oh, that's what you want me to do? Okay. And it was uncharted territory. And God called Abraham to leave what was comfortable, what was known, to put that aside and to go to a land unknown. And he didn't know why he was doing it, but Abraham packed it all up. He packed his family up and he said, okay, I'll go where you want me to go. By faith. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's someone out there today who needs to make a by faith statement. Put your name in there and then let God do the rest. Because that's really what it's about. It's a small step of obedience, isn't it? Every one of these people had faith. They had faith and they believed in the God that had a promise for them. But just as easy as it would be to say, no, thank you, I'm going to stick with what's comfortable. No, thank you, that doesn't make any sense. They had faith and trusted in the outcome. Where are you today? I think of Daniel in the lion's den. By faith, he didn't have a choice. He was tossed into that lion's den. He did not have a choice. That's what happened. But he had a faith in a God greater than the lions. And they slept. And he walked out untouched. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They didn't have an option. They were shoved into the fiery furnace. But by faith, they knew. And what happened? But a fourth figure shows up in the fire. And they walk out of the fire untouched, their clothes not singed, their hair didn't smell of smoke, by faith. I don't know who this is for today. Maybe it was just for me. But someone out there today is clinging on to their last strand. And God wants you to know he has promises for you. And by faith, what you cannot see today, Some may call you crazy today, but when it happens, they're going to say, whoa, look at the faith of that person. So my challenge to you today is, will you stand in faith? Will you stand in faith today, even when it makes no sense, even when it is one of the hardest things you have to do? And will you trust the future? Will you trust the outcome in the hands of the one who created you? Because he knows better. Sometimes it feels like we know better. We know what we want. We know what we need. But you know what? He's the one who formed you. And he holds your tomorrow in his hands. And he doesn't change like shifting sand. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So by faith, what are you doing today? Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me. I can't wait to hear your by faith story. Be blessed today.